We're going to kickstart our first session very soon. The first session is entitled From Insights to Breakthrough, Unleashing Innovation Through Customer Insights. Ladies and gentlemen, let's get it started. Now it's time for us to kickstart our first session of MarketingPulse and eTailingPulse today. It's From Insights to Breakthrough, Unleashing Innovation Through Customer Insights. Please join me in giving a big round of applause to welcome our moderator, Ms. Karen Ko, founder of Intermedia, and also our first speaker, Ms. Nikia Raveyak, Director Global of Consumer Insights, Netflix 2021 to 2024. A round of applause to welcome Karen and Nikia.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. We were so excited to come out. That's why we came out a little bit early. But we are on time right now and very excited and honored to have Nikia, this beautiful human, joining us this morning. She flew all the way from New York to talk to us, so we're really honored to have her. And who is Nikia? Well, she's really a transformative force in the world of insights, of innovation, and leadership. She's worked with some of the world's best-known companies, the best-known brands, and has really built a career over 20 years at the intersection of creativity, of strategy, and of human understanding. So we're really looking forward to, Nikia, what you have to share with us. The way this is going to work is Nikia has a presentation she's going to share with us, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. If you have questions, we'd love to have your input, so please enter them in through the conference app, and I'll try to get the questions to Nikia as well. So Nikia, take it away.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. How are you feeling this morning? Great? Okay. So it's actually my first time in Hong Kong. And I'm incredibly excited, and I did what most people do when they're going to go visit a place for the first time. I asked my friends, and they told me about all the things to do and all the things that I should eat, though I have no time to do any of it. I also asked my other friends, Google, and all of my AI bots for advice. And the thing that I learned is that, like New York City, Hong Kong is a place that is vibrant and dynamic and has this incredible ability to transform, to adapt, and to maintain a kind of nimbleness through constant change. But I asked myself, what is it that allows a city to change? What is it about these places that over time continue to be among the most vibrant and the most innovative places to visit on the planet? What is it that makes the city that it is? And I had this feeling that, cities like New York and Hong Kong don't become the places they are without one essential ingredient, and that is the people. It's the people inside of these cities that evolve, and because they're evolving, the cities have to evolve to meet their needs. And so too must the most innovative brands in the world. What they do an incredible job of is understanding people's needs. I think, moreover, the thing that these innovative brands do is they're able to understand that by falling in love with people, falling in love with the customers that they want to serve, there is this wonderful path to innovation. They understand that if they focus on the people, the profits will follow. Now, I want to make that easy for you guys, but one of the things that I will do is spend some time sharing 3 specific examples from my time leading insights and research and analytics teams at these wonderful, influential, innovative brands and companies, of how an unending love and passion for understanding customers and people led to breakthrough innovation and drove incredible brand growth. Now, I want to make the link easy for you. And so what I did was to come up with, I think, is a simple yet incredibly powerful framework for you to consistently link people and profits. And that is the love equation. I'm incredibly excited to share it with you guys. It really is as easy as A times B equals C, but you're probably looking at me like I get math, but I don't know what you're talking about. And that's okay. That's exactly what we're going to talk about today. Because the love equation inside of organizations is a very, very simple framework to adopt. At the end of the day, what I'm talking about is to fall so deeply in love with your customers that you amplify your awareness of what they need. And when I talk about what they need, I mean understanding them so well that just like a good friend, you know exactly what present to give them. You should also be asking yourselves, do I understand their needs, the things that they do, the journeys they take to solve problems, the way things fit in their lives, to the extent that I should? If you were to close your eyes right now, you don't have to, and think about your customer. Do you know what they turn to when they're feeling sick? Have you spent a day in their lives, in their shoes, to understand the things that make them feel terrified when they go to bed at night? Do you know what a good day is for them, or a bad day? These are the questions that you should honestly be asking yourself so that you amplify your awareness, so that you are falling in love with the journey of knowing your customers so well that at the end of the day, you're able to develop something that delights them, that is brilliant in its breakthroughness. Be it a new product, an enhanced service, some sort of new experience, or wonderful new ways of engaging with your consumers, you should really understand exactly what it is to deliver to them that makes their lives a little easier. It should not feel like an interruption. The solution should not feel like a chore. The solution should not feel like something that is going to take too much time for them to do. It should be easy and seamless. And if you do all of these things well and consistently, you will have a level of customer commitment that is undeniable. You have to trust me, but I will take you through some examples. And the thing that I want you to take away is that you can't do this one time. You should not be doing this just two times or a handful of times. This is something you should be doing all the time. Because at the end of the day, if you can develop this unsatiable appetite to know your customers through and through amplifying your awareness beyond just the data points, so that you can develop something that is truly delightful and breaks through in their lives because it means something to them, the customer commitment, the love, the loyalty, the profits will follow. So let's go on a journey together. I'm going to take you through those 3 examples of innovations that were developed during my time leading these global teams at Colgate, Twitter, and Netflix. So let me start with a story. One of the things that I loved about working at Colgate was how intensely obsessed we were about falling in love with knowing everything about our customers. Now, it's interesting because we spent an incredible amount of time obsessing over their brushing habits. Now, the interesting thing is for you to think about this. In the last year, 2024, how much time do you think you spent thinking about or talking about your mouth, your teeth, your tongue, cheeks, gum? Do you remember? Well, we talked about brushing habits all the time. Every time we walked in the door, we were talking about the way people brush. And you see this woman here? She's a fake woman, but let's pretend she's a real woman. She barely even spends time thinking about her mouth during the 2 minutes that she's supposed to be brushing her teeth. And it's interesting because customer obsession, understanding everything we possibly could about people's brushing habits, was like in the DNA of the company, and it was a wonderful thing. And it led us to do research consistently to monitor the behavior in the form of these surveys that we would run around the world to explore what people said they did. Now, something interesting happened. We discovered this fascinating insight about tongue cleaning. And we learned that for the most part, people who brush their teeth would then flip the toothbrush over and brush their tongues. I do that. I'm sure a lot of you guys do that. But for a small group of people, the very act of brushing their tongue was incredibly uncomfortable. It was a struggle. And some people were so frustrated with the gagging and coughing that would happen that they just gave up altogether, later leading to bad breath, which was not great. Now, one day, a designer inside of our research and development department at Colgate named Eduardo, who loved research, he would attend every focus group, every report that the research team produced about brushing habits, he would consume. He immersed himself in understanding everything that he could about the way that people were brushing. He had this breakthrough idea. He said, wait, what if we just put something at the back of the toothbrush that is like a tongue cleaner, and so that we have this effective multifunctional tool that does everything inside of one brushing occasion? We were all like shocked. But the thing that I want you to remember is that if he hadn't applied this love equation where he was amplifying his awareness of what people were doing, I have a feeling that he might have just come up with a different configuration of the bristles or a new color toothbrush. I do not think that the innovation would have been as successful. So what we did that was key to the love equation in action at Colgate was to not assume that a brushing habit survey would give us all the data that we needed. A lot of people fall into this trap where they assume that the answers are in surveys and data points. But at the end of the day, we were so curious to understand whether what people said they did, because people lie, we all do, is actually what they did. And so we conducted ethnographies. We would go spend a day with them in their homes. We would go drop their kids off to school with them. We would go shopping with them. We went to the dentist with them, all in this desire to understand whether what people said they were doing matched up with their actual brushing habits. We even went as far to have some people install cameras in their bathrooms that would record what they were doing and then keep diaries that allowed us to really understand those nuances. And so all of this amplification of awareness led to a breakthrough idea at the time. It led to insight-driven innovation in the form of what was then the new Colgate 360 manual toothbrush. And it was incredible because what it did was to provide a solution that was an enhancement to something people were already using and doing. And for us, that was an incredible example of brilliant breakthroughs from amplified awareness in action. And the results were fantastic. At the time, in 2005, this was the first toothbrush to break through the manual toothbrush category. It catapulted Colgate shares through the roof and set a new standard in the category, and spawned many, many, many line extensions that are still around today across all categories of toothbrushes. But I think the thing that was the most beautiful about this was the thing I want you guys to take away. At the end of the day, we have this perception with the word breakthrough that it has to be incredibly game-changing, and many innovations are, but this shows that sometimes the insight nugget comes from not a big new product, but from understanding people so deeply that they can come up with an idea that addresses a need that people didn't even know they had. It's like giving your partner a birthday gift that they didn't ask for, but when they receive it, they are so grateful that you knew exactly what they wanted. Now I want to give you a little insight into how innovation came from an amplified awareness of our users back during my time at Twitter. And I'm going to take you on a little journey. And I'm going to pause because honestly, that was a traumatic time. So think back to 2020 for a moment. If you remember, things were going from bad to worse. Many of us were spending a crazy amount of time online searching for information, trying to uncover the truth, and devouring news for answers. Now, imagine what it was like working at Twitter. It was a lot. And I share this with you because one of the things that was beautiful about working for that company is that while we were trying to protect the truth, especially the research team, where we were trying to help ensure that people were getting accurate information on time, and also work to make sure the public conversation, which was a global conversation at the time, was healthy. But we saw that trust and safety were under attack in 2020. And if you worked in the US, it wasn't just COVID-19, it was also a US election cycle, it was also a post-George Floyd's murder and a resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement. There was a lot going on. And on top of that, we were also users of that same platform that we were employed to try to protect. So it was a big job. But at the time, we started to observe an interesting trend, and that was the spread of misleading information, misinformation. And one of the things that we found really interesting was that people were spreading the misinformation, but not really realizing that they were doing that. But we also knew that all it took was one person to create a tweet with misinformation about a pandemic that was about to take hold across the world, and that news would spread like wildfire. Because we knew that bad news, fake news, and negative information tends to spread far quicker than good news. And so the research team had to leap into urgent action to try to understand not just that people were sharing misinformation, but why. So one of the things that we noticed was that when we would actually start to talk to people who had shared the misinformation, a lot of them were just well-intended users who wanted to pass along something they thought was important. But the thing is, the information was spreading so quickly and creating waves of panic across the world that something had to be done. So we did even more research and discovered that people were really trying to not do the wrong thing, but they had no idea. And so there was a limitation at some point to the research we were doing, because we did the surveys, we had an abundance of data, because this was Twitter. We also did a lot of interviews one-on-one with people who had just tweeted something, but we still didn't have anything that gave us some guide way to the solution. And so we turned to behavioral science, because we had this knowledge inside the company that the science of changing somebody's behavior would be perhaps more insightful than why people were exhibiting the behavior. And so we went to academia, talked to behavioral science experts, reviewed a ton of literature, and had a little bit of an idea. We wondered if we were to give people some small, timely nudges, because we've seen through the science that when you want to try and get somebody to change behavior, and please don't try this on your husbands and wives, but when you're trying to get somebody to change behavior, sometimes it's the small, thoughtful interventions that cause people to stop and consider the impact of what they're doing that can make all the difference. And so that was the way of us falling even more deeply in love with our users at Twitter. We continue to monitor usage. Well, what are people doing? We conducted the focus groups and the in-depth interviews to go deeper, to really understand. But we didn't have an answer, and so we extended our research toolkit to go to behavioral science to understand more about how to get people to change. And so that led to this beautiful innovation of a nudge. It was a pop-up that would appear on the screen of somebody who had just tweeted something that included potentially unverifiable or inaccurate information. And it'll ask them, "Are you sure?" And what we saw were remarkable results. There was a significant decrease in the levels of information sharing that was misleading. And so it was an incredible testament to the power of doing something small to try and guide an experience in a more beneficial way that also addresses some potentially damning societal challenges. And so the biggest takeaway that I have here is that innovation isn't always about launching something incredibly new or developing a significantly different experience for your users or your customers. Sometimes it's about the introduction of a small, timely little nudge to guide people towards a more beneficial behavior that impacts not only their individual experience, but also helps the broader community at large. My third and final case study is from Netflix, a company that's near and dear to my heart. The thing that was interesting about working at this company was how much they had a leadership over customers. Because if you remember, a little bit over 25 years ago, Netflix was the company that came on board and disrupted the way that people consume entertainment and media. Now, my responsibility and the responsibility of the research team there was to monitor perceptions of the brand and its health over time. So this is a survey that was run across 26 markets across the world, with hundreds of thousands of members and non-members to keep a pulse on how people felt about Netflix. And for a long time, nobody touched the data because we were always strong. But when I came on board in 2021, I remember looking at the data and being surprised to see that although the perception of Netflix was great, it was still the largest, the most known, the most favorable. There were some subtle shifts happening in the perception of Netflix. And this was not surprising because it went from being in a sea where they were the only one to being in a sea where everybody had a streaming platform. And so the risk was that it was not going to stand out. It was going to be considered more generic. But there's something that you guys should know, this word in English called hubris. It's basically when you feel like you're untouchable. There's a little bit of that arrogance that begins to sneak in because you're doing good. And so in this situation, I remember being so insanely obsessed with understanding whether the data and my gut that said if nothing was done, there was going to be a loss of an emotional connection with the brand. And do you know what happens to brands over time when the emotional connection is lost? Do you know what happens to brands over time when they're considered interchangeable with other solutions? People start to choose based on price. In addition, when it comes to this category, people start to choose on price and content selection. And so they would sign up to be able to get access to a particular set of programming and then sign off. And so the loss of revenue was starting to creep in. So the hunch was there, and I wondered if there was this opportunity to come up with a new brand campaign. But interestingly, at Netflix, there were other brand campaign attempts that had not done well. Do you know why? Okay, you don't have to answer. Because they didn't apply the love formula. 10 points if that's what you were thinking. But basically, those previous attempts started from the idea, not from this crazy, irrational love of understanding people. And so this time around, what was different was we amplified our awareness, and we assumed that there was something to pay attention to instead of assuming there was nothing to pay attention to. Because at the end of the day, we had that quantitative data. We then followed up with multi-country focus groups among members and non-members. And we dug deeper to ask the question, what's different, what's not different, and why? And they were honest with us. And that honesty led to this idea that Netflix had these emotional strengths that no one else owned at the time. And that was the element of surprise. It's only on Netflix, despite all of the content that it includes, that you can, if you're open to it, have a kind of joy of the discovery of entertainment that brings you cultural moments and sparks conversations around the world that nobody else can. And so that formed the foundation for this new campaign that really came from a place of emotional connection with people that always centered around the thrill of what's next. And the results were astounding. The Q4 results for Netflix are incredible. The stock price right now is insane. It's been a year since I've been working at that company, and I'm wondering, maybe I should go back. That's another keynote. But at the end of the day, those results are a testament to the power of this love equation. That all of a sudden understanding exactly what was going on and not assuming that a subtle shift in perception meant that you should ignore it led to results that have not only cemented the emotional connection that people have with Netflix, but also made non-members consider it. And so the takeaway there is really to remember that it's incredibly important to think about all of the shifts that happen that can go unnoticed because they feel too small. Paying attention to an early warning signal can lead to a lot of joy in the end. And so one of the things that all of these companies have in common, they all share this incredible ability to generate profits. And they all have done a good job of falling in love with people. But I want to just call out the 3 things that I think you should take away across all of them, and I want you to hold this in your heart. Because the love that I have for customers and all of that pales in comparison to the love that I have for you guys, even though I just met you. I really want you guys to take this away, because even though it uses the word love, it does lead to incredible results. So the first thing is that all 3 examples had teams that went beyond just looking at the data. They had this deep curiosity to understand more. The second thing is the importance of going beyond data. So I'm sure you're going to be exposed to a lot of data and information today. And like me, when I started my search to understand a little bit about Hong Kong, I have a bunch of data points, but you should always go beyond that to learn as much as you can and never take the numbers at face value. And finally, a new feature is innovation too. Don't discard those little things that still make people's lives a little bit better. It's incredibly important to include all of it in your thinking about breakthrough brilliance. And now, as I close, I want to acknowledge that you may be wondering, this is great, Nikia. Thank you so much for sharing this. But what do I take home to my team on Monday? Like, how do I incorporate a little bit more of this culture inside of my organizations? The first, you have to figure out how to create systems to make the customer the heart of your company, the decision-making that you make. It's really incredibly important to ask yourself, does everybody know about the insights that we're getting about target customers, or just a few people? The second, incredibly important to democratize access to all of the insights that you have. Remember that example with the toothbrush? The person who came up with the innovation was a designer who was incredibly passionate about insights, but that's because it was easy to find it. It was easy for him to know when the focus groups were happening. He was in love with knowing about customers because we made it really easy. So think about the ways that you can democratize access. Do you have a library where all the research is? A new employee who comes to your team who's like, I kind of want to know a little bit who our target consumer is. Is it easy for them to find that information? And finally, I can't stress this enough in this age of AI and digital transformation. Yeah, use all the data that you have access to. Run the surveys, ask a query on AI, leverage your friends who have syndicated data, but always balance that with a deep, unending desire to know humans. The human connection, the human in all of this is so complicated, so irrational, so different, even though, I'm from New York, originally from an island called Trinidad and Tobago, but I feel like we're brothers and sisters. There's a lot to know, though. And so balance that data with intuition, and you will be fine. And so I want to leave you with this. Don't forget my love equation. Let's love each other, because the world is crazy these days, but as we think about developing solutions for the customers that we want to delight, amplify your awareness to no end. Don't stop with the data. Don't stop with the query. Ask yourself, do I know enough, and can I know more? So that you can come up with brilliant innovation that delights them, that doesn't have to blow their minds, but it just makes their lives a little bit easier, so that ultimately you have a level of customer commitment that's undeniable. And so you fall in love with your people, and the profits will follow. Trust me. If you don't, come talk to me afterwards. And with that, I want to thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nikia, for sharing that formula, ABC. And I thought it was really interesting that in all your examples, it was just a little thing. You didn't have to reinvent the wheel or the toothbrush to see results. So I think that's really testament to the fact that knowing your customer and meeting some of these unmet needs that they may not even be aware of can make such a huge difference. Yeah. So I wanted to ask you about how, when you are a researcher and you have all this data and it's deep and it's broad and it's overwhelming, how do you then translate that to leaders to say, this is what you can do with it? Because just dumping data on people doesn't work.
No.
So how do you connect the data to some form of action to make it digestible, to make it understandable, and then say, this is why we need to change X?
Thank you so much for that question. I'm fangirling. Isn't she amazing? I mean, and it's a great question. Thank you for asking it. The thing that I will say is that everything starts with a sharpened research question or business question. I think if we did not start all of these things with a problem statement, so, in the case of Netflix, there was we want to move from our first and only ever Q1 2022 loss of subscribers to understand what happened, because it went from there was no signs of slowing down to all of a sudden a loss. And so that business framing allowed us to start to look at the data with a really sharpened focus lens. And so what that allows for is that as you're collecting data points, you become more discerning. So instead of it just being well, there's a story here, and there's another story here, and this one seems good, it's very much through the lens of the original problem or challenge or question that was there. When it comes to crafting the story, I think that lens of what was the objective that I went into this with is also beautiful. And so as a leader, when people would come to me with their reports, a lot of what I would do is to say, okay, this slide here is a nice to have that I know makes you feel good, but what does it have to do with the problem at hand? So there is that culling and shaping of a story that's true, but very focused on the original challenge. And then finally, when it comes to distilling, I think I can't stress enough this idea of the love equation, even for internal stakeholders. So when my team, when I would take them on and we would have offsites or training, I would say the same love equation that you're applying to understand your customers on the outside, you need to apply to your customers on the inside. Ask yourself, that fancy, chief product officer over there, they're just another human, what's their communication preference? Or they like infographics? Maybe you should think about how you might translate these 100 slides into an infographic that they would read. Or is your stakeholder the engineering team? They prefer a lot of charts and numbers. So it's tailoring the message, coming up with breakthrough, brilliant messages, so that you are really coming up with a commitment to the research and a commitment to act because you amplified your awareness and understood your stakeholders so well. So guys, the love equation is good for customers, working with your team members. I have not tested it on romantic partners yet.
How about your children?
It's hard to know if they're loyal. I don't know if they're loyal. They're 9 and 12. They're, challenging.
Now, the other thing that you mentioned there, you said the word I had a gut feeling, something about your gut, right? And there is always something about your gut that tells you, no, this is off, or it could be better, or maybe we need to make a change, or something around us is changing. So how do you balance that use of the data-driven insights with intuition and with creativity?
Yeah, that is a favorite question. Thank you for asking it. You know, I am somebody who grew up as a professional modern dancer before I got my MBA and decided to like work. So I always had, I think, this ability to tap into the emotions and needs of people. And so I think that there is a little mix of you're kind of born with it. You know, by the time you start working, have you grown up in a household where people were really encouraged to understand each other? So some people just kind of come into the world because of the conditions of their lives, being a little bit more attuned to understanding people and those things that aren't said. If you don't have that, there are ways to cultivate it. And I think part of it is working with mentors in your organization who have that ability to look at data, be very well informed, but speak to the nuances of social dynamics. And that could be everything from the cultural things that make me a Caribbean person, similar to people who live in, you know, a tropical environment, or you who grew up in Australia. Did I remember it? I did. And so I think that there is an opportunity to seek out those people in the companies that you work at so that you could become better at discerning how to blend, I know my stuff, the data is my foundation, with a little bit of, oh, I get that there's this dynamic that is hard to articulate on paper, that AI will never fully get, that allows me, one, to craft narratives that reach the hearts and minds of people, but also do really well inside of your organizations, because everybody at the end of the day is coming out of the same fancy schools. I think the thing that sets people apart is the ability to understand people.
Okay, we have some great questions from the audience. You know, some of the companies that we have here are not so huge. They maybe don't have big budgets to do a lot of research. So first, one question is, are there any shortcuts? If you can't afford to run focus groups and do intensive research, what can you do?
So that's a great question. Thank you for whoever submitted it. You know, at the end of the day, I think there is a way to embed inside of even the smallest companies a hunger to understand your customer. You may not have a dedicated researcher or a research department yet where the expertise is there to know how to interview people, how to recruit people for a focus group. But there are low-hanging fruit. There are some things that we can all do, like making sure that every other Thursday is go out and get to know your customer day. Or once a month, for half a day, you bring in some of the people who are users to just have lunch with them and like ask some questions, you know, what's working, what's not. And so there are light ways that even if you're not a researcher, you don't have the budget to hire a researcher or a research agency, you can get that pulse. And then don't underestimate the power of setting aside budget to ensure that you have these syndicated relationships with data providers, like, I don't know if they still call themselves Global Monitor or Data Monitor or, you know, GSK. There's just a bunch of companies that are responsible for keeping a pulse on what's going on, and that investment will never do you wrong. So free things like just asking people to come over and talk to you in your office, and then paid things that'll always pay dividends later on.
Another question here is, when do you decide when you have enough data, and what are the indicators of that?
Can we, though, have enough data? Okay, it's a good question. So I think it depends on what type of data, right? The word data is superfluous large and has become somewhat genericized, like strategy and innovation and even marketing. But when I think about data, I think there are all sorts of data that we must continually collect. So if we want to include qualitative or thick data, that, I think, allows us to understand things that are happening to consumers that change their view of the world. So if you did a survey to understand attitudes and habits in 2023, there are things that have launched, solutions that have made their way into the world since then, that would not be replicated in people's attitudes and the things that they say that they need from that time. So I do think that as the world evolves and new solutions come to bear, there's always a need to collect more. That being said, there are questions that are finite. They were time-bound, and you got the research, you have the answers, and you don't need to touch it again. But when it comes to those needs, the way that attitudes change, the way that entertainment consumption is changing, generational differences, I think we always need to kind of find a lightweight way to keep a pulse on that.
Another great question here. Have you ever been stumped for a valuable insight when there's conflicting data from your research?
Ooh, good one. Yes, all the time. I think the thing that I will talk about, which I remember from my days at Colgate. So when I worked at Colgate, there was always a need to do something head-to-head. If there was a new name for a fancy toothbrush, there would be a division inside the company around who preferred Colgate Clean White versus Colgate Sparkly White. And when we would put the two ideas into testing, obviously separate groups of people so they're not comparing, we would often get results where it was like a dead tie. And so what I think was really helpful in elevating the way people thought about research was to present it as such. There isn't a clear silver bullet with research. We're not like the function that has all the answers. We're here to move people from ambiguity to a little bit more clarity. A little bit of, insecurity to more confidence. And so what I would often do is to present it that way. I would say, remember we had an objective of choosing a new name of this fancy toothbrush? Well, I did the research, and we have two clear winners, and they have different strengths or weaknesses. Now let's have a discussion about other things that might affect the decision. Oh, the pack only allows for this much space? There's your winner. It's clean white because we didn't have enough space. And so I think the role of data and research is to say, here's a little bit more to help inform your decision and give you confidence, but as a team, let's sit down and make the right call.
Another interesting one here. If you got part A of your formula, awareness, wrong, or if the data that was provided to you was wrong, or if the team read the data wrong, how would you correct the results of the formula? And when would you know that, oh, it's wrong? How do you then correct the solution?
I mean, whoever wrote that, let's come up, let's hug afterwards. I really just love that question. Sorry. If culturally it's not okay to hug, we don't have to hug. But to answer the question, I think that if you do a good enough job amplifying your awareness, what you have is a set of disparate data points, but they are numerous, right? And so I don't know if you realized this as I was speaking. At no point did I say we had one source of data. So I think if you've done research and you have one source of data and that survey was wrong because the sample was dirty, then yeah, what you get out is not good. My first manager used to say garbage in, garbage out. And so the chances of you finding that nugget that is actually a solid insight to innovate from increase the more diverse and robust your research is. So if you have a challenge and you have the data, you talk to experts in academia, you're also doing some interviews with people. You go even further. By the time you're done, it might feel like a lot, but there will be pattern sensing. And so I do think that the equation kind of works less in terms of accuracy. It's not binary in that way. It's more in terms of the richness of the first phase. Diversify it. Ensure that you're not just leveraging quant, that you're doing qual. And then even at the end, the process of coming up with the idea, it's not the research team, it's everybody's decision. And how you implement that is also everybody's decision. So I think if we were to sort of think about this love equation, keep on remembering that at the end of the day, it's about falling in love with the knowing, right? So it's not necessarily falling in love with the person, though I fall in love all the time. I'm married, by the way, but I'm always falling in love. But if you can fall in love with the journey to know, kind of like a religious experience, like, oh my God, I want to know, I think you increase the likelihood that all of the other stages will be wonderful.
Well, Nikia, I would love to talk more, but we are actually over time.
Oh, no.
So Nikia will be around if you would love to, if you'd like to talk to her personally and ask her some of the other questions. But thank you so much for sharing the love equation, which we will all remember. And best of the rest of your time in Hong Kong.
Oh,
Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, everybody.
Can we have a round of applause for Nikia, please?
A round of applause to Nikia and also to Karen. Thank you so much for this interesting session. I would like to invite both of you, please kindly take a few steps to the stage front and let's have a group photo to capture this inspiring moment.